The first thing Vivian Blackwell said to me that morning was that my fishing dock had destroyed half a neighborhood, and the second was that I owed her $3 million. The third was worse, because she smiled when she said it. Fog hung low over the Cinder River while my line sliced through the gray water, and behind me 6 people in matching cream jackets marched down the old dock like they were invading a small country. Vivian's heels struck bores my grandfather had driven into the riverbed in 1936. She stopped behind me and said, "Mr. Rourke, your refusal to modernize this property has caused catastrophic damage to Willowcrest Estates." I kept watching my float. "Morning to you, too." Vivian was president of the Willowcrest Homeowners Association, the kind of woman who treated neighborhood rules like scripture and every conversation like a sentencing hearing. Behind her stood the rest of the board with clipboards pressed to their chests, except Ruth Kessler, the new treasurer, who kept looking from the brass federal marker beside my bay table to the survey gear in my truck. Ruth looked like someone realizing she might be standing on the wrong side of an expensive mistake. Out in the channel, a county patrol boat drifted near the buoys, his deputy pretending not to listen. Vivian snapped her fingers, and Dean Pike, the board secretary, handed me a thick envelope. "You've been served," he said, staring near my left boot. I opened it and found a lawsuit accusing me of negligent water control, failure to maintain private flood barriers, intentional redirection of runoff, and $3.1 million in damages. It would have sounded impressive if any of it had made sense. The Cinder River was not private. The bank was not theirs, and the barriers they claimed I had neglected had never existed. The vote was unanimous, Vivian said. "You have 30 days to settle before we pursue criminal charges." That made me turn around. She looked polished and almost pleased while families uphill were still dragging soaked couches and ruined drywall out of their homes. People who are truly devastated do not arrive looking ready for a campaign photo. They arrive exhausted, scared, and angry in ways they cannot hide. Vivian looked like the flood had given her exactly what she wanted. "Criminal charges for what?" I asked. "Reckless negligence," she said. "If anyone had died, we would be discussing homicide." The deputy on the boat turned his head. "You may want to call somebody who understands federal waterways before threatening me on one." Her eyes narrowed. "We researched you. You were discharged from the Army Corps of Engineers." "Retired," I said. "Full honors, full pension. Different thing entirely." A couple of board members shifted. I had spent 12 years charting river depth, flood behavior, bank erosion, and navigation corridors for the Corps, then several more consulting on water rights cases. I knew every federal marker on that stretch, every old easement, and every line on the navigation charts. More important, I knew the river had not caused that flood by itself. 3 weeks earlier, I had heard diesel engines upstream after midnight and seen work lights flashing through the cottonwoods. Trucks marked Blackwell Land Group had backed toward the bank. Vivian's brother owned that company. Then the spring rain came, and water that once spread across natural wetlands hit a narrowed channel like pressure through a pinched hose. It rose fast, broke retaining walls, and filled the lowest homes in Willowcrest to their windows. While Vivian kept talking, I looked past her and saw the arm of an excavator behind fresh fencing, along with new concrete shining white against the mud. Somebody had forced the river inward. Somebody had created speed where there used to be space. "Are you listening?" she asked. "More than you know." I pulled out my phone and photographed the excavator, the concrete, the Blackwell truck beyond the trees, and every uneasy face on my dock. Vivian gave a thin laugh. "Pictures will not change the facts." "No," I said. "They usually reveal them." Right then, a small aluminum boat came through the fog. Gus Halpern, owner of the marina downstream, pulled alongside with a coffee and a manila folder. Gus had lived on that river for 46 years and disliked homeowners associations on principle, mostly because one had fined him for keeping a canoe where canoes were apparently too visible. "Morning, Nolan," he said. "These the people saying you flooded their fancy houses?" Vivian turned on him. "This is a legal matter." "Good," Gus said. "Then you'll want records." He tossed me the folder. Inside were emails he had sent the HOA 4 years earlier, warning them not to fill the wetlands, narrow the spill channel, or build homes below the flood line. Their replies told him to stop interfering and direct future concerns to council. Vivian's expression barely moved, but Dean went pale. Ruth whispered, "Oh my God." Vivian stepped close to her. "Treasurer, Remember your duty to this board. Ruth lowered her eyes, but not before I saw real fear there. Not fear of a lawsuit, fear of the people beside her. I folded the complaint and set it on my tackle box. You have a community meeting this afternoon, right? Vivian lifted her chin. By the end of it, we will authorize every action necessary to remove you from this river. I picked up my rod and cast past the patrol boat. Bring a projector, I said. Your neighbors are going to want to see my maps. She stared at me, then turned, and her cream-jacketed army marched back toward the road. Ruth was last. As she passed, her hand brushed my tackle box and left behind a folded bait receipt. I waited until the cars disappeared before opening it. On the back, in hurried blue ink, she had written, "They planned the flood. Check the insurance." I read the note twice, then handed it to Gus without saying a word. He looked at it, took a slow sip of coffee, and muttered, "Well, that explains why Vivian looked happier than a tax lawyer at an audit." I wanted to laugh, but the truth was already settling into place with an ugly kind of precision. Flood insurance policies increased before the storm, illegal construction upstream, a development company owned by Vivian's brother, and an HOA board trying to pin responsibility on the nearest man they assumed nobody would defend. I'd seen schemes built out of greed before, but this one had something colder underneath it, because the people behind it had not just risked property. They had gambled with families sleeping in basement bedrooms and elderly residents who might not have made it upstairs in time. I pulled the old core map from my truck and spread it across the hood, weighting the corners with 2 tackle boxes and a wrench. The federal navigation boundary ran clean through the area Vivian's lawsuit described as her association's private waterway, which meant the first half of her case was fantasy, and the second half might be evidence of a federal crime. I need everything your cameras caught 3 weeks ago, I told Gus. Already copied it, he said. 2 trucks, 1 excavator, 3 men, and a woman in a white coat standing by the floodgate. Vivian? Couldn't see her face, but she had the same posture, like the whole world owed her an apology. My phone buzzed before I could answer. The number belonged to Caleb Moore, an old colleague from the Corps who now ran special investigations for Western Waterways. I had sent him 3 photographs and a short message while Vivian was still standing on my dock. Caleb never wasted words. "Tell me you didn't touch anything," he said. "I didn't." "Good. Those concrete cuts look recent, and they're inside a protected channel. I'm sending 2 inspectors tomorrow morning. Make it sooner." There was a pause. What else? Possible insurance fraud, altered permits, intentional flooding, and an HOA president threatening criminal charges to force his settlement. Caleb exhaled through his nose. "That is no longer just our party. I know. Send me the complaint and the insurance angle. I'll contact the Federal Fraud Task Force." I drove to the Willow Crest Community Center, a glass and stone building perched on filled wetland like a very expensive bad decision. The afternoon meeting was still hours away, and the parking lot was mostly empty, which gave me time to walk the perimeter. Behind the building, I found a row of new drainage channels, each one poured with the same pale concrete I had seen upstream. Instead of feeding a retention pond, they angled downhill toward the narrowed section of river. It was not subtle once you knew where to look. Water had been gathered from the streets, roofs, and parking lots, then accelerated directly into a channel that had been deliberately constricted. Whoever designed it understood exactly how to turn ordinary storm runoff into a wall of water. I photographed every outlet, every construction mark, and every stamped batch number still visible along the concrete edges. "You really should stop taking pictures," a voice said behind me. Dean Pike stood near the service entrance, his jacket gone and his shirt damp with sweat. Without the clipboard, he looked less like an official and more like a frightened accountant who had opened the wrong file. "Public property," I said, "and evidence tends to dislike privacy." He glanced toward the windows. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then help me understand." Dean rubbed both hands over his face. "Vivian's brother, Grant, owns Blackwell Land Group. Willow Crest was supposed to be their biggest project, but the soil problems doubled the foundation costs and half the luxury units never sold. They were bleeding money before the first family moved in, so they raised the insurance coverage." His eyes snapped toward mine. "How do you know that?" "Because nervous treasurers leave useful notes." He looked genuinely sick. "Ruth found the policies after her husband died. Martin was treasurer before her. He started asking questions about payments to shell companies and emergency construction contracts. Then he had a heart attack. You think it wasn't natural? I think Martin was healthy enough to run 10 miles every Saturday, and I think he died 2 days after telling Vivian he had copied the financial records. A cold pressure moved through my chest. Do you have those records? Ruth does. She has copies, but she's terrified. Grant knows where her daughter works. And what about you? Dean laughed once, without humor. I own a printing business. 90% of my commercial contracts come from Blackwell companies. Vivian told me if I resigned, I'd be bankrupt in a month. That's leverage, not innocence. I know. He looked down at the drainage channel. I approved the meeting notices. I signed minutes I knew were false. I told myself I was protecting my employees, but really I was protecting myself. I had spent years around men who confessed only when the walls closed in, and Dean sounded different. Shame has a rhythm to it, slower than panic and heavier than fear. Then stop protecting yourself, I said. Protect the people they flooded. Before he could respond, a black SUV rolled around the building. Grant Blackwell stepped out, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and dressed in the kind of suit that made ordinary men look underdressed in their own offices. He had Vivian's eyes, pale and dismissive, and the relaxed confidence of someone who had been obeyed for most of his life. Mr. Humbles. Rourke, he said. You're trespassing. I'm inspecting stormwater outlets on common property. You're harassing my sister. Your sister brought 6 people in a patrol boat to my dock. Grant smiled. Then she was being cautious. He came closer, and I noticed a slight shape beneath his jacket near the waist. Armed, probably licensed, definitely meant to be noticed. You used to work for the government, he said. That must make retirement difficult. Men like you miss feeling important. Men like you confuse money with importance. His smile disappeared. Take the settlement. We'll reduce the claim. You sign over the river access, and everyone walks away. There it was, clean and simple. The lawsuit was not only about blame or insurance, it was about control of the shoreline. You need my dock, I said. We need a continuous private waterfront. Your property interrupts the development plan. Federal water interrupts it more. Federal agencies have budgets, delays, priorities. People exaggerate how much they care. You built your plan on the hope that nobody important would look. I built it on experience. He leaned in close enough that I could smell mint and expensive cologne. People get tired, Mr. Rourke. They settle. They move. Sometimes they have accidents. The threat was quiet, almost conversational, which made it worse. I looked at the security camera above the service entrance and hoped it recorded sound. Did your sister teach you subtlety, or was that a family tradition? His face tightened. But before he could answer, Ruth's sedan entered the parking lot. She saw us, stopped too fast, and nearly clipped the curb. Grant stepped away from me and straightened his cuffs. We'll continue this inside, he said. In front of witnesses, I replied. That's my favorite place to continue things. By 6 o'clock, the community center was packed. More than 200 residents filled the chairs, lined the walls, and stood in the hallway. Some still wore work boots coated in dried mud from cleaning their homes. Others held photographs of flooded rooms and cracked foundations. Vivian sat behind the board table beneath a polished willow crest emblem, looking composed enough to host a fundraiser. Grant stood near the side wall. Dean would not look at either of them. Ruth kept a large purse on her lap with both hands wrapped around it. Vivian opened the meeting by calling the flood an attack on our community caused by the reckless actions of one shoreline owner, then invited me to the microphone with the smile of a woman certain she had already won. I carried only a rolled federal map in Gus's manila folder. The room turned hostile before I said a word. A man near the front shouted that his daughter had lost everything in her basement apartment. A woman called me a criminal. I let them speak, because anger deserves room when grief is underneath it, and I unrolled the map across the front table. My name is Nolan Rourke, I said, and I did not flood your homes. You board did. The room erupted. Vivian struck her gavel so hard the handle cracked against the block. That is a defamatory lie. Then let's look at dates. I held up Gus's emails and read the warnings from 4 years earlier. Warnings about wetland fill, channel narrowing, and predictable flood behavior. Then I showed photographs of the fresh concrete, the excavator, the drainage outlets, and Blackwell Land Group trucks working upstream. People began leaning forward. Anger was changing direction. Vivian accused me of fabricating the images. So Gus stood from the back row and announced that his security system had recorded the work at midnight, including vehicle plates and timestamps. Grant moved toward him. The three marina workers stepped into the aisle. "Stay where you are," one of them said. Vivian shouted for order. Then Ruth rose slowly from behind the table. Her face had gone pale, but her voice carried. The insurance coverage was tripled 61 days before the flood. Nobody moved. Vivian turned toward her. "Sit down." Ruth opened her purse and removed a flash drive. Martin found payments to Blackwell Land Group for emergency water control work that was never presented to the membership. He also found altered permits and 2 sets of engineering plans, one submitted to the county, and another used during construction. "Ruth," Grant said softly, "think about your daughter." That was the moment the room changed. People heard the threat in his voice, and fear became fury. Dean stood too. "She is telling the truth." Vivian stared at him as though betrayal were something only other people were allowed to commit. "Both of you are confused." "No," Dean said. "I was afraid." Ruth walked to the projector table where her daughter, Emily, waited with a laptop. They plugged in the drive, and the first email appeared on the wall behind the board. It was from Vivian to Grant, dated 3 months before the flood. "Complete the upstream constriction before the spring rains. Rourke will absorb liability. His shoreline claim is weak, and local enforcement is already handled." The second email was worse. "Increase coverage before quarter close. Once losses are documented, we pursue acquisition of the Rourke parcel through settlement pressure." A sound moved through the room, not quite a gasp, more like 200 people realizing they had been used at the same time. Vivian stood so fast her chair fell backward. "Turn that off." Emily clicked the next file. An audio recording began. Martin Kessler's voice low and tense, asking why maintenance funds have been routed through 3 shell companies. Then Grant answered, clear as if he were standing at the microphone. "Because nobody audits grief, Martin. Flooded families want checks, not explanations." Ruth covered her mouth. Dean began crying silently. Grant pushed away from the wall and reached inside his jacket, but he never got the weapon clear. 2 county deputies came through the rear doors, followed by Caleb Moore and 3 federal agents wearing windbreakers marked Core Special Investigations. The lead agent raised his badge. "Grant Blackwell, keep your hands where we can see them." Vivian backed toward the side exit, but Gus blocked it with his cane. "Meeting's not over," he said. Caleb crossed the room and handed me a sealed folder. "We found unauthorized control structures under the new concrete," he said quietly. "Remote gates. Somebody could trigger the flooding on command." I looked toward Ruth, and she was staring at one final file on the laptop. A private message sent from Grant to Vivian the night Martin Kessler died. She clicked it open, read the first line, then whispered, "Nolan." This was never just about the river. Ruth turned the laptop toward me, and even from 6 feet away I could see the subject line. "Martin knows too much." The message was short, colder than anything Vivian had said on my dock. It instructed Grant to meet Martin behind the old pumping station, make it look natural, and recover whatever copies he had made. Ruth stared at the screen like she was watching her husband die a second time. "He told me he was meeting someone from the board," she whispered. "He said he'd be home before dinner." Vivian found her voice first. "That proves nothing. It's taken out of context." "There is no innocent context for make it look natural," I said. Grant lunged toward the projector table, but the federal agents reached him before he made 2 steps. One caught his wrist. Another drove him against the wall, and the handgun beneath his jacket hit the floor with a heavy metallic crack. The room erupted, residents shouting, chairs scraping, someone crying near the back. Vivian tried to slip behind the curtain beside the stage, only to find another agent waiting there. For the first time since I had met her, she looked ordinary, no polished smile, no perfect posture, just a frightened woman trapped inside the consequences of her own decisions. Caleb asked everyone to remain seated while agents secured the building. Then Deputy Marshal Lena Ortiz entered carrying 3 arrest warrants and the calm expression of someone who had delivered bad news to powerful people before. She read the charges aloud: conspiracy to defraud insurers, destruction of protected federal waterways, extortion, obstruction of justice, and suspected involvement in the death of Martin Kessler. When she reached Vivian's name, Vivian actually laughed. "You think one retired surveyor brought down my family?" I looked at her across the room. "No, your family did that. I just kept records. That answer seemed to bother her more than any accusation. People like Vivian need to believe their enemies are obsessed with them, because the truth, that facts can dismantle them without hatred, feels almost insulting. As the agents led Grant away, Ruth grabbed my sleeve. "There are more developments," she said. "Martin found files from New Mexico, Idaho, and Nevada. Flood claims, washed out homes, people forced to sell afterward." My stomach tightened at Nevada. I asked Emily to open the archive folders. She found a project called Red Mesa Crossing, built 14 years earlier beside a seasonal wash. The names attached to the ownership documents were different, but the show companies led back to the Blackwells. 4 people had died when a retaining berm failed during a storm, a couple and their 2 children. The family name on the report was Mercer, my sister's married name. For years, I'd believed Anna and her family died because a developer cut corners. I had never been able to prove more than negligence, and the case had disappeared beneath settlements, missing records, and a judge who ruled the failure unforeseeable. Now I was staring at emails showing that Grant's father had ordered the berm weekend before the rain. Vivian washed my face and understood before anyone else did. "You knew," she said. I shook my head. "I suspected your family. I didn't know until now." "That's why you bought the river property." "Partly." The room had gone quiet again. I told him the truth. After Anna died, I spent years tracking developments connected to the Blackwell network. They used new company names, local partners, and relatives in different counties, but the pattern stayed the same. Cheap land near vulnerable water, inflated insurance, engineered failure, quick payouts. Then forced acquisitions from ruined neighbors. I bought small downstream parcels through trusts whenever I could, not to trap them, but to preserve evidence if they repeated the scheme. Cinder River was the first place where I had enough visibility, enough federal protection, and enough old records to make their method impossible to hide. Vivian's face hardened. "So this was revenge?" "No," I said. "Revenge would have been easier. This was patience." The agents took her away while residents watched in silence. No applause, no cheering. Just the strange emptiness that follows when people discover the danger was sitting beside them at every meeting, voting on landscaping budgets and holiday decorations. 6 months later, the trials began. Grant accepted a plea only after investigators connected him to 4 engineered floods in 3 states. He received 48 years. Vivian went to trial, blamed everyone around her, and received 36 years for conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and her role in Martin's death. The judge who had fast-tracked the lawsuits was removed from office and later convicted of bribery and obstruction. Dean cooperated, served 18 months, and lost his business, though several Willow Crest residents later helped him start over. Ruth testified for 9 days. She never raised her voice, and she never looked at Vivian. Not once. The river work took nearly a year to undo. Federal crews removed the hidden gates, broke out the illegal concrete, reopened the natural overflow channel, and restored the wetlands the development had buried. Some homes could not be saved, but the insurance settlements were reopened, and the residents received compensation from seized Blackwell assets. Ruth used part of her husband's estate to establish the Martin Kessler River Safety Center in the old community building. Gus insisted the first exhibit include the canoe his HOA once called an eyesore. He won that argument, mostly because nobody had the energy to fight him. As for me, I stayed on the dock. People sometimes ask whether I felt satisfied watching Vivian and Grant get sentenced. I did, but satisfaction is not the same as peace. Justice does not bring dead people back, and prison numbers do not fill empty chairs at family tables. What it can do is stop the next flood, save the next family, and tell powerful people that patience is not weakness. Some mornings, Ruth brings coffee. Gus brings complaints, and we watch the river move past the old federal marker like it has somewhere more important to be. I still fish before sunrise, and every now and then I think about Anna, about Martin, and about all the people who were told their losses were accidents when they were really someone else's business plan. So tell me this, was I right to spend years watching and waiting until I had enough evidence to destroy the entire network? Or should I have acted sooner and risk letting them escape again? And if your own community leaders used fear, lawsuits, and tragedy to protect themselves, how far would you go to expose them? Leave your answer in the comments. Share this story with someone who has ever been bullied by people hiding behind authority. And remember, Water always finds the truth eventually.